Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Turnbuckle Sessions. I am your host, Thomas Montalto, and today is an episode I've been wanting to do for a long time. We have a very special guest with us. We have one of the founding fathers of the Turnbuckle Tavern. We have Chad. How's it going, Chad?
It's going great, man. How's it going?
I'm good. I'm good. I mean, this is exciting for me because I've always wanted to talk. We talk all the time, but
All
we've
the
never
time.
sat down and actually talked about how you fell in love with wrestling. So I'm looking forward to getting to know you on a whole nother level.
I'm looking forward to it, man. I don't know if I've ever done one of these. I've done, me and Snead have done some podcasts, but I've never done one solo, one on one, where you're digging into my brain. So I'm looking forward to it, man.
And let me tell you, man, that brain is fascinating because your takes, sometimes you just leave me, I've said it on a debate where I'm like, mic drop, just end it right there. He makes solid points. You're excellent at what you do. Your views are amazing. But let's go way back to the beginning. When did you first fall in love with wrestling? What are your earliest memories?
My earliest memory of pro wrestling is Bob Euchre being choked by Andre the Giant. And I
Wow.
believe that was, what was that, WrestleMania 4?
Yeah,
I
WrestleMania 4.
so and my family never bought. I mean, I was, man, 88. I was 4 years old, I think, when that Mania happened. Um, they weren't buying pay-per-views. My family didn't watch wrestling. It was just one of those things where, when you're a stay-at-home mom and something grabs your kid's attention that keeps them from crying, you leave it on that channel. So my mom, which my parents are divorced now, but at the time they were still together, um, my mom said that I was just fascinated with like Hulk Hogan and Ultimate Warrior, and my dad hated pro wrestling, and
Oh,
he would
wow.
always try to turn it off, and they would get into arguments because she was like, he likes it, just let him watch it, just let him watch it. But yeah, I remember those early WWF stuff, but I mean, the those are my early memories, but it had to be on like on one of the recap shows that I saw that, because like I said, we didn't get pay-per-views, so it's not like I was watching WrestleMania. So it had to
Yeah.
be, what was the show where they were in the studio and they had the bleacher stands with Bobby the
Uh,
Brain Heenan?
oh, primetime wrestling.
I think it was that, and they were maybe showing a recap of that or something like that. But other memories, I have way more memories with WCW. Um,
Yeah, I mean, I found it kind of fascinating. I knew you grew up in the South and were a big WCW guy, but your first memory was a WWF.
oh yeah, I mean, I was Hulk Hogan. I had Hulk Hogan everything. Ultimate Warrior. I had remember the bedroom suit for kids where you got the comforter that had Hogan, Legion of Doom, Jake Roberts, the
Yeah.
pillowcases. I had all of that. Um, my mom was buying me the Hasbros as a kid, the Galoobs as a kid. I had every single one of those, most of them. Um, but WCW came here. The live shows came here. We didn't get WWF live shows. And I remember we would go to the grocery store and the magazine section. Every time we would go, my mom would buy me a wrestling magazine. And at the time, they always had WCW magazine. This was when Lex Luger was being managed by Harley Race and he was the champion. You had Rick Rude as the United States champion. Sting, obviously. Sting was by far my favorite wrestler as a kid. When I was that age, he was my guy. But Ric Flair, all of that early 90s era, that's really what I kind of cut my teeth on as a kid.
Wow. So I guess is that when you fell in love with it then?
Oh, yeah. I would say the early memory of Hogan and everything, that was just my introduction into it. But as far as falling in love with it was definitely WCW Saturday Night, WCW Worldwide, WCW Power Hour, all of those shows. Uh, Luger, Sting, Arn Anderson, Flying Brian Pillman was one of my favorites. I got to meet him when I was like 8 years old. I got my
Oh.
picture with him. I was wearing a little red cut off shirt, and he signed the back of my shirt. My mom still has it at her house,
Oh
like put
wow.
away for me. Yeah. Um, so that's when I really fell in love with it. Because in the WCW magazine, they would do the rankings, and I started to see all of these faces that you didn't know, and just the world of pro wrestling, man. Like the stories, the larger than life characters. I'm one of those kids. I don't see how anyone, especially a boy at that age, how do you watch that and not like it?
I
It's
agree.
it's everything. It has everything that you would like as a kid.
So true. As a kid, I remember loving it, and all my friends and my brothers around me, they all stopped watching it, and I never grew out of it. I always liked it. So you meet
Yeah.
those new friends in school that still liked it, and it was crazy. I remember Pro Wrestling Illustrated magazine. I love the rankings in there because you could see who was in the top all over the country.
Oh
And
yeah.
even though you didn't get to watch it because I lived in New York at the time in the Northeast, so we were in the middle of WWF country. Um, but until I got to follow Ric Flair and know who Ric Flair was at the time, Rick Martel was the AWA champion.
Yeah.
The Road Warriors on the cover of every magazine, Magnum TA. I never saw those guys wrestle. We did get AWA wrestling. I do remember watching a little Road Warriors as a kid because they just recently did that episode with Mike Belcaster where we went back and talked about the match with the Road Warriors versus Kurt Hennig.
Oh
And
yeah,
I think it
yeah.
was Baron von Raschke, and it was just a crazy situation there. But
Yeah.
so I do remember actually watching that, and I had the AWA videotapes as a kid too, because when you're a kid, you just want to watch as much wrestling as you possibly can. I remember
That's
renting the videotape of Roddy
Yep.
Piper versus Greg Valentine in the dog collar match.
Oh yeah. See,
So
that's what I forgot to say. You talk about how did you fall in love with wrestling, and WCW was definitely more prevalent on cable television in West Virginia. Like I said, the live shows came here for WCW, but the thing that got me into pro wrestling, as far as all of it, the history of it, WWF, I was a movie rental kid. Like I I lived there all the time. My mom, I don't know if this is a thing in the north or other places, but in the south, tanning bed salons always had rental movies.
really,
It was a combo thing. Like if you went to a movie rental store, they usually had about 3 or 4 tanning beds where people would, women would go in and lay in a tanning bed for 15 minutes. Well, my mom was one of those moms that always laid in a tanning bed. When she would go there and I was with her for 15, 20 minutes, when she's in there, I'm just walking around the store looking at these VHS tapes. And they would get so pissed at me because she would always the place the movie rental store I grew up in was called Mr. Video. And they had a deal where you rent 3 movies and you would get a fourth free. So my mom would always allow me to rent 3 to get a fourth. And they would always get so pissed because I would always come come to the counter with like Royal Rumble 1992, Survivor Series 1989, because it was the covers, man. If you remember
yeah,
those VHS covers for the early Royal Rumbles with all of the guys standing and kind of marching towards
yeah.
it. I mean, come on, man. A kid that just drew me in. It was horror movies and WWF wrestling tapes, and I would wear them out. Like I'd watch them, rewind, watch them again, like just completely enthralled. So the movie rental store and renting wrestling pay-per-views, because like I said, my family wouldn't buy pay-per-views. I was always watching them when they came out on VHS. So I was big into that.
Yeah, I was lucky. My uncle had the black box, so I got to go got to go visit my uncle once. Well, I guess back then it wasn't every month; it was the 4 or 5 a year with the King of the Ring. Um, but it's crazy. So you go along the lines, you big WCW guy, straight up. You're a young teenager during the Monday Night Wars.
Yeah. So Monday Night Wars kicked off, what did you say, 96 when NWO started?
Yeah, yeah.
So I was 13. I
Oh
was
yeah.
around
Oh,
13, 14 years old when it kicked off. Perfect time. I mean, I as a little kid, I'm getting the golden era. with
Okay.
Hulk Hogan and all of that. And then as I'm going into my teenage years, I'm getting the more adult, as you're starting to look at girls a certain way, you're getting half naked women in bra and panties matches. Like, so it just all fit, like ECW, all of that just kind of, for a young boy coming of age, adolescent, it was the perfect time. But yeah, I mean, when NWO hit, I remember junior high, it swept through the school where people that weren't professed wrestling fans, or maybe they hid it and weren't proud of it, now it was cool to be a wrestling fan. The Attitude Era, there were people watching. I remember my mom, who never really watched wrestling, even her and my stepdad thought Stone Cold Steve Austin was cool. It was like even the adults were becoming entrenched in WWF and WCW. Now, I was still on the WCW bandwagon in those early days when NWO was kicking off, and I would say probably around the Goldberg era is when I switched and became a WWE guy. Like when
Okay.
Goldberg came into the picture, that's when I flipped, which I was watching both. I was the classic channel changer in between commercials, but I would always kind of lean on WCW more. But then as Goldberg came in, I didn't really like him. I started liking Stone Cold way more. So WWE took precedent, and I would watch Nitro in the commercial breaks.
Yeah, and by that time, it was a national sensation. Everybody had cable by that time, so you could see, you got your choice.
Yep.
I imagine, because I stood WWF the whole time back then, because I grew up with WWF. I didn't really know much. I didn't, just from what I read in magazines, like I talked about before. So, I mean, of course, took little peeks at WCW. I
Yeah.
wonder if I had had a DVR, if I would have had watched both of them
I did the VCR,
religiously.
man. I would
Did you?
record. I would record one on VCR and catch up later. Um, I would even, back in the early 90s when I was a kid, my mom would always record the WCW Clash of the Champions. I still have probably 6, 7 of those tapes that were just recorded straight from TV, have all the commercials in them. So I would do that to watch what I missed during those commercial flips.
That's funny. My mom just recently called me up, and she's like, "Hey, I found a whole bunch of your old videotapes here. Do you want them?" And I'm like, "Well, what does it say?" And she's like, "WrestleMania 3, WrestleMania 4." And I'm like, "Wait, these are the ones I recorded?" She's like, "Yeah." I'm like, "Do not get rid of them. I
Yeah.
want the original entrance music. I want to go
Yeah.
back and like transfer them over and make them digital and see what it's like, because we don't get to see that anymore."
No, it's lost to time, man.
Yeah. So you fall in love again. Well, you never really fall out of love, but we get the Attitude Era. This is the era where we really get introduced to surprises. As a kid, we love wrestling for the moments. But
Right.
there was really no big crossovers back then. Like you pop, everything was kind of pre-recorded when we were kids.
Yeah.
I think other than Saturday night's main event, and I think they might have even been pre-recorded. I don't know if they were just presented live. Something I have to go back and check now. I never actually thought about that. It felt live, but I
Yeah.
don't know if it was. Um, so we get introduced to the surprises during the Attitude Era and during the NWO era, because we're seeing guys jumping back and forth, and
Oh
you
yeah.
never know who's going to turn up on where. And it's fun when all of a sudden you see Lex Luger on the first episode of Nitro when he was on WWE the week before, or you have Rick Rude on Nitro and Raw on the
On
same
the
night,
same night. Yeah.
on the very same night. So like that was a different feeling. We're older and we're excited all over. Like it's a different type of excitement. Like you're in love with it, and seeing those moments. You see Hulk Hogan come out for the NWO, and you don't know that he's going to do it, and he turns heel. It's where the moments really became something special. Would you agree with
Oh
that?
yeah, man. I mean, it it was really a different time. I mean, it was one of those things where you got to think at that time the internet really hadn't taken hold. It was there, but I wasn't, unless you were like subscribed to, Wrestling Observer. I was a kid. I wasn't subscribed to dirt sheets. I didn't even know what those were at the time. I was strictly a fan for being a fan. And when you tuned in and something happened, you had no idea it was going to happen. It would blow your mind. The excitement of Monday nights when I was a teenager, 13, 14 years old, Monday nights, I there was I was always at home. It was such a thing where even if I was out with the parents doing something, they knew we had to get home by 8 o'clock. Cause that was like just the feeling of being in my bedroom, sitting on the edge of my bed, because my TV was right in front of my bed, sitting there, and that opening video of Nitro with the city and the fire and the music playing. I mean, the excitement that would run through your body as a kid, that's what you looked forward to. You know, every
Yeah.
Monday, like, man, I cannot wait for, and then it would happen and they would end on some huge cliffhanger. And I still remember, because I was a big WCW Saturday Night fan, and my mom was like, well, they have some new show they have coming out called Nitro. And I remember sitting down to watch that first show. I think it was in 95, and Luger comes out on the very first show.
That was at
And
the
I'm
Mall
like,
of America, right?
yeah. And he was just, I don't know the time frame now specifically, but as a kid, time is different. Everything
Yes.
seems so close. And I remember thinking, like, he just body slammed Yokozuna. How is he just body
How?
slammed Yokozuna? How is he here on this show? And your mind starts going, you don't know the business end of it. You don't know
Yeah.
about the contracts and the all of this type of stuff. It's like Superman jumping into a Spider-Man comic. It's like, that can't happen. That's DC and that's Marvel. How are these two characters coming together? It was that type of feeling as a kid.
So how'd you feel then when the Radicals showed up on Monday Night Raw and they're
Oh, I
taking their
loved it,
seats?
man. I loved it. That was just another thing, because that was those guys. I was a big, big, big fan of the cruiserweight division as a kid. I mean, I loved Hogan and Sting was my guy, but outside of Sting, my favorite wrestler was Chris Jericho. I had the Monday Night Jericho t-shirt. I love that guy. So I was really invested in the Jerichos, the Dean Malenkos, the Chris Benoits, the Juventudes, the Rey Mysterios. I loved that division. I mean, some of their matches back then would stand up today. They were so ahead of the times. And when Eddie Guerrero, when they all showed up on Raw and they're all sitting in that front row, it was like, okay, it's one thing for one guy to jump, but to see all four of those dudes,
Or
Perry Saturn, all of them sitting in that front row, it was like your mind melted. What? It felt like an invasion. It felt, because you didn't know, you're 15, you're like, are they with this company now? Are they just showing up there on their own? It was the whole blurring the lines of kayfabe. You still bought in.
yeah. I mean, if I remember the week before it happened at Monday on a Monday night, I think they walked out of Nitro and JR, they wrote into a segment where I think Triple H broke his arm to get him off the air so he could go contact these guys and get them all over there. And then the next
Yeah.
week it all happens. That was pretty big stuff back then.
Yeah,
Like I said,
that was a
it's
big
so
coup.
exciting.
That was a big like dagger into WCW when I feel like that was one of the major points where it's like, man, this company is just dropping the ball. They just let
Yeah.
all four of these guys go.
And not only that, you got Jericho right around the same time.
Yeah,
Like
he came a little before them.
he was a little before. Okay. So it's kind of
Yeah.
weird thinking back again. You try to think back to the time frame and it seems like it all happened so fast. You don't really know, but then eventually we get the news Vince McMahon buys WCW and
Oh,
I'll
dude. Yeah. Wow. Like when that happened, okay. I had an after school job at Kmart when that happened. I worked in the
okay.
hardware department, and the guy who worked in the sporting goods section was also a huge wrestling fan. He was probably 6 or 7 years older than me. He was in his mid 20s, and I was 16, 17. No, yeah, I was 17 when that happened. I'm just this starry eyed, gullible, just I don't know the business like that. I'm thinking this is the best thing that ever happened at that. I'm thinking like, man, they're all going to be together. Sting's going to be there with Stone Cold. You're thinking of all the possibilities. I was so excited. And then you keep waiting for the big guys to show up, but we don't get the big guys. We get,
No.
we get a lot of the, the Mike Awesomes, the not to shit on anyone, but like Booker
Yeah.
T and DDP, and those guys are great, but we weren't getting the Halls, Nash, Sting, Flair. You weren't getting the top guys. So it quickly, that is when my fandom started to erode a little bit. Now I still watched,
Yep.
but the years after that buyout is when I started to notice it wasn't the same anymore for me.
Yeah, it's exactly, this is the point I was working to, because it's probably the worst thing that could have happened to WWE at the time. And for the next 20 years is not having that major competition.
Yep.
There's no need to keep your work at a certain bar, because there's nowhere else for anybody to turn other than indies. Like how badly do you think that hurt WWE for the next 20 years?
I
Yeah,
think
20 years.
I think it was like Chinese water torture for them. It was like a slow death.
Yeah.
I don't Because here's the thing, like it's not like it happened immediately or we saw it, but if you really go back and look at the history of wrestling, that buyout is when everything started going downhill. It was a slow decline. And
Yep.
there have been great things. There have been things that have brought me back. I mean, I watched up until 2008. 2000 I was watching up until about 2007, 2008, with Eddie dying, the Chris Benoit tragedy, the buyout. I started watching UFC at that time. I was in college. I was at film school actually in Florida, and started getting more into UFC, stopped really watching wrestling. It just didn't, it wasn't the same, but it was this slow kind of just downhill slope for me for quality. Like they didn't have that drive. You had TNA, but it wasn't really, there was a lot of mistakes and things over there that I couldn't attach to either.
Yeah.
And then like CM Punk hit and the pipe bomb, because I was a fan of him in that shitty version of ECW that they had. And then I
Yeah.
stopped watching. And then all of a sudden I hear, I'm still kind of peripherally keeping up with the news of it through the internet. And then I hear about this pipe bomb. So I start watching again. And I watched probably until 2015. And then 2015, I just kind of was, I always stay up on what's happening, but I'm not that every Monday night viewer like I was.
Right.
And
Right.
yeah, but I definitely think that was the beginning of the downfall. And it hurt, that buyout hurt WWE. It totally did.
Oh, it hurt them so much more than it helped in the long run. Like I said, everything just became complacent for the next 20 years. There was no more surprises, nobody showing up. They didn't have to. We had some great moments. Like you said, CM Punk had a great run in WWE. He put on matches and he was fighting for essentially what AEW has become. He wanted a pro wrestling business. We had the Daniel Bryan run.
Yep.
He
That was a
was
great
amazing.
run.
The Yes movement. And it's funny, I've noticed over the years, I was never an indie guy, but the guys I always took to in WWE were the guys who came from the indies, because I was a huge CM Punk fan. I was a huge
Right.
Daniel Bryan fan.
Those
And I
ROH
love,
guys.
yeah, I love Kevin Owens.
Yeah.
Those are the guys who I've taken to over the last, 20 years and plus some. But and I think just out of habit, week after week, I kept watching wrestling, and I still enjoyed it because it was pro wrestling. Like, I just love pro wrestling no matter
Right.
what. And I lived in that WWE bubble, and I never really, I wish at that time I would have went and watched Ring of Honor. And
Yeah. Me too.
and I've talked to you about this, and I used to say, man, I want that feeling to be back. I miss that feeling of wrestling was when I was a kid, and I used to question, was it just because it was greater when you were a kid, because everything's bigger than life when you're a kid, or is it just that it's not good anymore? And recently, we've both learned, you a little sooner than me, you could have greatness even when you're an adult, and you can enjoy it just as much as you did when you were a kid.
Oh, absolutely. And I think this kind of goes with what you said about all the guys that you found yourself liking were indie guys. Um, I think a lot of that has to do with like we didn't know that I always say this on the podcast, and I'm not trying to be a dick about it, but I really do feel like a lot of WWE fans have a version of Stockholm syndrome where if you're only watching WWE, you think that is the only way pro wrestling should be done or can be done. Um, or you just think that's what pro wrestling is. And I feel like when the buyout happened, something happened. I don't know if it's when they went public or what, but they weren't always so buttoned up, and it was a little more shooting from the hip, and there was a lot of that indie vibe to it as far as like capturing that lightning in a bottle and that just spontaneity of the moment. And then it became real packaged, and it lost that just spark to me. And so when you say that those guys, those indie guys were the ones that you gravitated towards without even knowing their backgrounds, I feel like that's because they were offering something fresh and you didn't even realize it. There was a
Yeah.
fresh way to do things because they were coming from ROH. They were coming from the indies, and they had this kind of, they hadn't been it was unadulterated. They hadn't been
Yeah.
tampered with. They hadn't been ran through the WWE system and kind of packaged like everyone else. So they still kind of had that independent sheen on them that was like, ooh, this is different. Ooh, the way they're cutting that promo is interesting. Because I'm the same way. Like the Daniel Bryans, the CM Punks, the Kevin Steens, Kevin Owens, those guys, you're like, man, these guys are bringing an attitude that I haven't felt since 1997. Where
Yeah.
has this been? So it's almost like as those indie guys started coming into the company, I started to become more aware of, hold on, WWE's doing me wrong, and they used to not do me wrong. They
Right.
used to give me this. They used to create this themselves. They used to create those moments, and now it just seems so overproduced and overpolished that when you would get kind of that outside rogue guy coming in, it felt new, like, oh, well, maybe this guy can change the company or take it back to the way it used to be. And obviously it's like a politician. You think a politician's going to come in and change the world? No, they just get chewed up by the system and they turn into any other politician. It's the same thing with wrestling in WWE.
That is so
No
true.
one wrestler is going to change that company. They're just going to fall in line and do what they do.
And the truth is, CM Punk did try when he was
Oh,
there.
he tried.
He
Yeah.
coined the voice of the voiceless for a reason. He knew what people wanted to see. He knew what wrestling fans wanted. They wanted pro wrestling. But it's a long story. I feel like Vince, right away the fans gravitated to Daniel Bryan. From the time he got fired with Nexus for choking out Justin Roberts, I believe it was, with his
Yeah.
tie.
Yeah.
Right then they wanted to get rid of him. And then the fans were outspoken so loud that, I believe that was before. No, I guess Matt Hardy was before that when they outspoke to bring Matt Hardy back. But they got Daniel Bryan rehired way back then.
Yeah,
Right
and I
then.
feel like even then they were it's almost like then there was still, you could still create enough of a stir to make them listen a little. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like Daniel Bryan, you couldn't deny it.
Yeah.
But I wonder if the yes movement happened today, would they listen like they did then? Because I feel like the further along we go, the more and more they turn a blind eye to that stuff.
I agree, but here's my question. The whole Kofi Mania thing, Kofi winds up filling in for Ali, in the, I guess it was the Elimination Chamber match, Or no, it was a gauntlet match to get into the Elimination Chamber, I believe, and he has
Yeah,
an amazing night. Do you think that whole thing was planned? Do you think they actually listened to people?
I think it was planned.
I think it was planned too, the whole Kofi Mania
I
thing.
think it was all orchestrated.
I don't think they, like you said, I don't think they listen to much of anyone at all anymore.
I think
I
they
really,
really
really don't.
tried hard. They really did a good job and of making it seem organic, but I don't think I don't know. I don't think that was completely organic from the crowd. I just don't. Uh, I, the fact that I think a lot of their moves over this last year and a half speaks to that. The fact that they're shit canning Bray Wyatt, like,
Yeah.
I mean, that's the one guy. A lot of the other guys, sure, they're cutting people, but the fact that this isn't Daniel Bryan leaving and they just couldn't re-sign Bray. They cut Bray Wyatt. That
Yeah.
blows my mind. That to me
The number
says
one merch seller in the whole company.
they're completely they're on some other shit now. Like they're not. I heard someone say, I think it was Dan Lambert, who's a lifelong uh, pro wrestling fan, and he said that he just gets the sense that they're too cocky. They don't listen. They think what they're doing is right, and it's the only way to do it, and they're completely not self aware.
Yeah.
They're
Let's
It's the worst way to be, man. If you don't have any self awareness as a person or a business, you're doomed to evolve. You can't change for the better because you think what you're doing is right. It's a classic like narcissistic way to look at things, I think.
Yeah, and this brings me to my next point. During this whole run, you have Chris Jericho there, who just keeps reinventing himself, and he's amazing. And he continuously, in interview after interview, says he'll never work for anybody other than Vince McMahon again. So,
Yep.
you know. And then you get Cody Rhodes, who's not happy there. He doesn't want to be Stardust anymore, and they say no. So essentially, that leads to Cody's release from the company, Cody getting his wish, and to me, right there, if they give Cody what he wants, we don't know how the landscape changes to what happens today.
it's
True or
it's a
false?
it's a phenomenal what if situation, man. Because if you remember, there was a ladder match with Cody. I forget what event, but he was involved in a ladder match and he was so over. The crowd loved him. This was pre Stardust. This was when
Yeah.
he was still just Cody. And he never got the push. I mean, you could say he was in the legacy group, with Randy Orton and Ted DiBiase Jr., which I thought was a phenomenal little faction, but they
Oh,
killed
I
that
agree.
before it even got
Yeah,
started.
they did.
But man, if they would have really saddled up with Cody Rhodes and pushed him to the top tier, I don't think All Elite Wrestling would have happened.
That's what I'm talking.
I really don't. And I think it's a shame. It's so short-sighted and it's such a bad business move. And it's moves like this, like we had the debate about is Vince McMahon a genius and whatever. I'm not going to get into all that, but it's these type of decisions that make, I think a lot of people's like, oh, he's still got it. And everyone, when you say that he's out of touch or he's slipping, there are little moments where I look to them and I'm like, that is a prime example that he doesn't, he's slipping. Like he doesn't have that mid 90s wit and he's not as cunning as he used to be because Dusty dies, Dusty Rhodes dies. Anyone, to me, that books itself. You've got his young prodigal son and he comes out, you do a promo where he just comes out in the Stardust gimmick because he was Stardust when that happened, I believe.
Yeah, he
Comes
was.
out, sits in a chair, starts wiping the makeup off. Like I can't do this anymore. I'm Dusty's son and I'm here to to take the family throne or whatever. Instantly, everyone's behind him.
100%.
You've got a superstar on your hands. They don't see that. All the fans see it. They don't see that. And then Cody's like, I want to bet on myself. And what a ballsy, risky move at that time. Let's think about that.
There's no major promotion to
There's
run to.
nobody. He's going to have to go out and bust his ass and hustle on the indies. He was showing up in Impact Wrestling. He was showing up in New Japan. He was showing up in ROH. He was doing all these little independents and really building a name. He befriends the Bucks. He befriends Kenny Omega. They start rolling together. He pops up on Being the Elite on the Young Bucks, YouTube show. And then we're off to the races. Those guys didn't know each other. Cody was a dyed in the wool WWE guy. He wasn't in the independent. He was almost like an outsider coming into that world. He had to prove himself. Who's this WWE guy coming in here and taking our bookings?
Yeah.
And they bet on themselves. They do All In. Tony Khan sees it. They sell out a 10,000 seat arena in 30 minutes. I mean, the rest is history.
Yeah. I mean, I first fell in love with Cody during Dusty's Hall of Fame speech when he inducted him. When he cut that promo to induct his father, I was like, wow, this guy could speak on a mic. Like, this guy is going to be a huge star, and they just never used him. So Chris Jericho at that point, you talk about All In, this is the point where he breaks what he's said forever, and he shows up at All In.
Yeah,
saying he'll never work for another company in the United States again that's not owned by Vince McMahon.
Yeah,
because he felt that loyal to him.
He's got the Pentagon Jr. face paint on, I think, in the mask, and comes out as a surprise. Like, this was happening at the same time. Jericho's dabbling in New Japan. He's having those matches with Omega, and he's cutting those promos backstage because they do the press conferences after New Japan, and he's cursing and like dropping F-bombs, and it was like a whole new Jericho. Like, wow, this guy seems reinvigorated. He's bringing the heat, like doing some of the best work of his career. And like you said, he always said he would never work in America for anyone other than Vince McMahon. And then All In happens. He calls Vince.
Yeah, I was going to say, don't forget, he still gives Vince a chance. He doesn't just not go back to WWE. He's still loyal, and he says to Vince, hey, listen, was there anything for me that we could do? Meanwhile, Jericho's seen what WWE has become.
Yeah. And Jericho is an underrated mind in the business.
Oh my gosh.
Like to me, he's one of the top minds in the business right now, currently.
Yeah, active. I agree. If not one of the most ever, and not even just now.
He's so good. Like,
if you listen to him
another level
on Stone Cold's Broken Skull sessions, the way how he could control the pen with just the audience with the click of a pen.
Oh yeah,
like he knows what he's doing out there. The guy is so in tune. It's crazy. So essentially, in my opinion, Vince McMahon is responsible for AEW.
Oh yeah, his cockiness, his out of touch decision making, not moving with Cody in the wake of Dusty and all of that, not doing something with that, not giving us a Dustin Rhodes Cody feud when they were Goldust and Stardust. That just kind of like there was a lot of stuff that he just wouldn't do that the guys were wanting to do. And then, the fact that he let Jericho just kind of go, and then, Jericho calls him before he's going to sign the AEW contract. He's like, I'm going to do this. And Vince even then's like, what? It's like, dude, I've been telling you this is what's going to happen, and too late now.
Yeah,
and
his unwillingness to listen to everybody, to the fans, to the wrestlers. Like there's so many to not listen to CM Punk, to not listen to Cody Rhodes, to not listen to Jericho, and who knows who else was in his ear. Listen, we could say a lot about Triple H, but I think Triple H gets to business more than Vince McMahon does at this point, and
Oh
knows
yeah,
it's
he's
quite obvious
fresher,
seeing
he's
what he did
sharper.
in NXT compared to what we see on the main roster.
Yeah,
Um,
Hunter has his finger on the pulse of what wrestling fans want more than Vince. Vince is out of touch. I mean, I'll keep
yeah,
saying it.
yeah,
And everyone says it, and it seems like, oh, it's the same old story. He's out of touch. Well, he is. I mean, he's
yeah.
blatantly out of
He is out
touch.
of touch. Even Pac knew it. Pac saw it, and where he shows
I
up
was
at
going to
the
bring that
same
up.
the press conference that Jericho does, and after that press conference, I think Vince felt it a little bit. He felt nervous because they said he called Jericho after that and said, "Hey, can you get out of that deal?"
Oh yeah, yeah,
So right
dude,
then
that
and
was the
there,
moment. That was I remember watching that press conference live because at that point you're like, what is this new? Because I remember the being the elite where they all turn their phones, the Bucks and Hangman and Kenny turn their phones and it says AEW and then Double or Nothing, and everyone's like, "What is this?" And then they announced the press conference at Jacksonville Jaguar Stadium, and I'm seeing the Bucks, and I'm like, "Oh, this is cool, Cody, cool." When Jericho came out, I was like, "Okay, this is the real deal." Like he's not going to sign with some just amateur hour promotion. Like they have sold him on something. So we don't know what he was sold on, but he knows.
yeah,
Jericho is a businessman. Like look at everything he's got his hands in. I mean, the podcast, Fozzy, television shows, like
selling champagne.
Champagne. Yeah, he's a renaissance man in pro wrestling. And
Yeah,
when he signed, I was like, okay, there's something to this. And then Snead ended up getting a promo code for Double or Nothing, and he just bought two tickets. And I think when he bought them, it was kind of I probably won't get to go, but I can resell them because it's a hot ticket.
yeah,
And then we ended up going. And I kind of lucked into that because at the time I had another trip planned. I was going to Utah and that fell through. And I had that time off from work already. And I told Snead, I was like, man, if you still have that ticket, I can go now because I'm not going to Utah. And so I just kind of fell into going and I was hooked.
I was gonna say, is that when you fell in love with AEW right away?
Yeah. It, the press conference and the announcement of Jericho, that was when I was like, okay, this is going to be cool. And I loved the idea of following a company from the beginning. Being able to see know the stories. I'm old enough to remember it. I'm totally engrossed in how wrestling is, the behind the scenes stuff. It'll be fun to watch and see who they get from WWE, who they can pick up from free agency. And I'm like, okay, they don't have television yet. They just announced Double or Nothing. You had no idea if they were going to get a TV deal. Everything was up in the air, but I was like, okay, I'm going to follow this company. Then Snead, the opportunity arises to go to Double or Nothing with Snead. And then on the way to Double or Nothing, you're getting these news of holy shit, they got Jim Ross. Holy shit, they're getting this guy. Oh
Yeah,
man, they're getting this. So it's like they're built it's almost like a fan, very much like myself, putting a company together and they're making choices that just gelled with what I love. So I'm
and
like, oh man, they haven't done me wrong. And then the event itself and Moxley showing up at the end, it was like a face melting moment where me and Snead were both like, I remember the match with Omega and Jericho ends. Jericho's in the ring and, time's kind of ticking by. And Snead looks over at me and he was like, I guess we're not getting Mox. And about the time he said that, because, everyone was thinking Mox is going to be here. Mox is,
yeah.
so
And he had
Snead
dropped that video where they had
dropped
the
that
dice
video.
with the date.
Escaping the prison. It had the date with the dice. Yeah. So everyone's like, oh, he's going. But then there started to be that scuttlebutt of, oh, this is a big swerve. He's going to go back to the Shield. And So everyone was wondering what's going to happen, but Sneed's like, yeah, I guess no mocks. And about that time, you saw everyone standing up, like freaking out. There was no music played. It was just like people look, and then you saw the spotlight and you saw him coming down the ramp or down through the crowd. And it was at that moment, the loudest pop I'd ever heard.
And it's funny with that. That was the first moment AEW created.
Oh yeah.
I remember going back because I watched that like the day after I saw it on the internet, and I was like, I loved Ambrose. He was my favorite member of the Shield. He was one of my favorite guys in WWE. But his last year in WWE, from when he came back from being hurt,
terrible,
and they made him that heel,
goofy bullshit.
Terrible. It was just, and I'm like, what are they doing to this guy? What are they? Oh man,
you could tell he was miserable, man.
Yeah, of course he
you
was.
Could tell.
The fact that he had to come out and make those comments about Roman Reigns when he was sick,
yeah,
it was not anything that I don't think anybody wanted to do. But so that's the first moment, and you adapt to it quickly. I was slower. When the TV came on, I DVR'd it, but I would only watch Jericho stuff. I would only watch Moxley stuff, and it would literally take me 10 minutes to watch a whole episode. But as time goes on, I'm watching, you get to know more and more people because Moxley's involved with different people and you see Jericho involved with different people. I always remember watching Omega because I've never really seen him before.
Right.
And in the beginning, he wasn't over impressive to me until I've seen what is to come of Omega. You got to see the true Omega. Yeah. And maybe even like, cause let's talk about the tavern really quick. How does that come about? You and Snead. I mean, I guess you and Snead have known each other since you were little kids. Give us a quick recap.
7th grade.
7th grade, okay.
Because my last name's Smith, his last name's Snead. We were in the same home room in 7th grade. And he actually, my mom moved back in 9th grade. When I was in 9th grade, my mom moved from where she lived, and it was like half a mile from Snead's house.
Oh, wow.
And we had hung out a few times, and wrestling fans, man. Like, he was a diehard wrestling fan. I was a diehard wrestling fan. And hanging out, like, we both loved heavy metal music, got into that, and just clicked. I mean, it's weird. It's like a weird symbiotic thing, man, because like his telephone number growing up was, the last 4 of his telephone number was 2124, and the last 4 of my mom's phone number was 2024.
Oh.
My grade cards would get sent to his house, and his grade cards, because we were literally Smith and Snead were, so there was all these like interconnections. And what's weird about it, like, so we met in 7th grade, love pro wrestling, a lot of similar interest, starting to hang out. I started driving. We'd drive around, get into shit like kids do when you're a teenager. So like in our, I want to say our late 20s, early 30s, we find out that we're actually like 2nd or 3rd cousins.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. His, let me see how. My grandpa passed away, and he was at his grandmother's house, and she was looking at a newspaper, and she said, "Oh, Kenneth Smith passed away." And Snead knew I was living in California at the time. I had flown in for the funeral, and Snead was like, Kenneth Smith, how do you know him? Well, that's so-and-so's brother. Well, my grandpa's brother was a scandalous man. He had 2 families. He had a secret family, and he had another family. Okay. So one of those families was my family. One of those families was Snead's family. And that's, we're related by that.
Wow.
So the one family was Snead's side of the family, and then he was married into my side of the family. So it's this weird, and Snead's dad told us about it. It blew our fucking minds, man. Like, absolutely blew our minds. we were just friends, like best friends, and then we find out, oh, we're actually distant relatives.
Oh, that's crazy.
Super
So
weird.
so then okay, so you go to was it All Out you went to the first one? Double or Nothing? Which I
Double or
forget
Nothing.
Double or Nothing.
Yeah.
So when did you guys start talking about the Turnbuckle Tavern?
Well, see, we wanted to do a podcast for a long time. We had a friend when we both lived in New York City for 3 or 4 years, and we had a friend up there. We would go to Monday Night Raws at Madison Square Garden with. His name was Mike Bean. We worked at Tower Records near Lincoln Center, if you know Upper West
I
Side,
know it
Lincoln
very
Center.
well. This is the best
Yeah,
Tower Records there was.
it was amazing. It was one of the best jobs I've ever had. Met the coolest people there. I mean, just any type of person you would want to meet, you would meet there. And we met Mike Bean. He was from the Bronx, diehard wrestling fan. He was probably 7 or 8 years older than he's probably around your age, Tom, honestly.
Okay. Oh, he's a young guy.
Yeah, real young guy. Big dude. He looked like he would have been part of like the Samoan dynasty. He looked like a Samoan just beast. Big dude, funny as fuck. One of the funniest guys. But the thing about Bean was he was just a brilliant wrestling mind. He was the first guy. I remember when Kurt Angle went to TNA, and I'm in the break room at Tower Records being like, this is awesome. This is going to be so good. They're going to start competing with WWE. And he just starts laughing. It's like he was the first one that would smarten me up like, dude, you've got pie in the eye, you're just not seeing how it really is. He knew the business better than anyone I'd ever met. And we always talked when we went to Florida for school. We always talk, man, one day it would be cool to do something with Bean, do a podcast with Bean. Then we really, in recent years, we really started talking about it. And unfortunately, Bean passed away. He had really bad diabetes, passed away. He would definitely be a part of the tavern. He'd be a huge part of the tavern. But yeah, we talked about it, but we never we're the type, we didn't want to start something half cocked. We didn't want to do a podcast and not have, the right equipment or not be dedicated to it. We knew okay, if we start, this is a commitment. We have to do it every week. We have to do it a certain way. And then the pandemic hit. I heard Bill Burr, I think it was Bill Burr on Joe Rogan's podcast, talk about this thing called a roadcaster. And I told Snead about it, and Snead looked into it, and he was like, dude, this is exactly what we need. Because Snead had equipment. He just didn't have everything yet.
Yeah.
And he was like, I could just sell what I have and get this because this has everything. So we did that. And then we were trying to do it at the beginning of AEW, but we just didn't get everything in time and things didn't line up. So then we started it when we did. And May, pandemic hits. We're like, fuck it, let's do it now. It's
That's
time.
crazy. So you have me call in, and at the time, I'm still in my WWE bubble. I'm vaguely watching AEW. I have it on a DVR. I'm fast forwarding. If I skip a week, I don't go back and watch it if I didn't get to watch it. But then something happens. I call in and we start a debate show.
Yeah, I think when you called in the first. I remember Snead telling me there's this guy in the Major Wrestling Figure podcast named Tom, or I think he was even calling you Thomas at the time.
Could be.
There's this guy named Thomas, and he wants to call in. And I was like an interview, and he was like, no, he just wants to call in because he has a way to fix WWE. I remember that was the initial call. He has a way to fix WWE and rebook it. And I'm like, okay, cool. We've never had a call in. Let's do it. And then when you called in, it was really good. We all kind of gelled, and I was like, oh,
really quickly.
This is fun. Because me and Snead can be, one, we have a lot of similar tastes, and we can be a bit of a couple assholes about WWE stuff. Sometimes we can just shit on it. So we're like, man, we need an outside opinion. And we thought that what we were doing was kind of stale because we're just agreeing all the time. And we're like, we need a debate show. We should have Tom. Let's see.
I think I called in twice before we did the debate show.
Yeah, you did. Yeah.
And I don't know if it was because AEW. The one thing I loved about AEW is they listen to fans, and their show. If you watch it now compared to the way it was when it first started, it's changed because they've listened to what people wanted.
Oh yeah.
That and I have a feeling it's partly a lot because of that, and partly because of you guys that and really seeing what they were doing compared to what WWE was doing, that I was just realizing this I'm never going to be happy watching WWE if they keep feeding out the same old crap. Like I said, I think I said it maybe on one of the call-ins. I have to go back and listen. I'd be curious to go back and listen to them now. But I think I said I want to love wrestling again like I did when I was a kid. I
Yeah.
did. I wanted this. I wanted that. Like you can't
Yeah.
wait for it to be over. You can't wait to see the next one. And I just started watching AEW more and more to the point where I believe the last time I stopped and didn't watch was when Brody and the whole Cody run. And then I went back and watched it after you guys talked to me about it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that might have been on a second call. And I went back and watched it and I was like, well, this is some of the best stuff I've ever seen. And from that point on, I never stopped watching it. I've never missed an episode of Dynamite since.
I remember that. And honestly, I can't blame you because I understand why a lot of diehard WWE fans find it hard to jump on, especially with AEW in the beginning, was because you've given all of your time, all of your fandom has been to this company. You know the history, you know the
Right.
names, you know the storylines, you know everyone, you know the lineage, you know everything. And now you're asking me to come into a company where I know a handful of guys. I know Cody, I know Jericho, I know Mox, but who's this Jungle Boy? There's a
Yeah.
dinosaur guy. Like, who's this MJF? He's like a Ric Flair knockoff. Like, what's he trying? So you're seeing like you don't know these dudes, and you got to relearn everything. And it's like a good TV show. You gotta that first episode's usually not that good because you're not connected to anyone. But by the
And
time you get to
sometimes
episode 10, you're locked. You're
and
locked in.
sometimes it's even the first season is not great of a
Right.
show.
Right.
You know, it takes a while. And the thing for me too is I kind of laugh at myself now because I'd look at Jungle Boy and I'm like, that guy's like a little nothing. Look at the size of him.
Yeah.
Look at this Darby Allen guy. And like sooner or later they capture you and you realize, wait a minute, it's still good. It doesn't have to be monsters that the WWE
Exactly.
makes you believe
Yep.
it has to be. You've got to stop and you got to get out of the bubble. You got to get out of their formula. And for me, after 40 years of being in that bubble, I've been able to escape it. And, you know, we've got good promos again. We've got good stories again. I look at Darby Allen now, and it's this guy who's larger than life. Even though he's smaller than
Yep.
most of the guys I've watched, it doesn't matter. The guy goes out
Yeah.
there and he puts on a hell of a show. The guy is one of the most exciting young guys there is in all of wrestling. You know, same thing with Jungle Boy. I
Yeah.
remember watching him in the beginning and thinking this guy's so small. And then when I was in Chicago and watched him in the tag team match for Rampage, watching him live, I found, you know, and I grew to like him more before then, but watching him live, you grow a whole new respect for him.
Oh,
I'm like,
yeah.
this guy can friggin' work like anybody. He certainly reminds me of a young Shawn Michaels. And I'm to a point now, I never thought I would get to this with wrestling again. I have fell in love with wrestling again in a
Oh,
way that I
yeah.
haven't been in love with wrestling for 20 years, and I didn't think it was possible. I thought I was just an adult, and that's just the way it was going to be. I was going to watch it. I was still going to enjoy it, and it's not the case, man. If you
No.
stop believing what WWE has brainwashed you on, and I'm not shitting on WWE, I'm still going to watch WWE.
Right.
Um,
I still watch a little bit of it. You know, I still
yeah.
keep up with it. I know what's going on.
Yeah, and we've talked about it before. We would love for WWE to say,
Hell
"Hey,
yeah.
listen, let's get good again. Let's do something."
I'm
Like
there.
everybody wants that. Like,
Yeah.
listen, the more wrestling is better, it's better for everyone if WWE gets better. You know, and
Exactly.
it's the same thing now. It's great for them to have their back against the wall in AEW to be doing what they're doing, or else it would have never. There would have been no chance of it changing. I don't know if there's a chance of it changing now. They are like we're seeing blood again in WWE. That had been gone forever.
You
So we're
gotta do a
seeing
lot
little
more than
things.
blood.
Well, it's like I agree. There's little things that are changing slowly, but as bigger things happen in AEW, I hope bigger things
Well,
happen
that's
in
what we hope.
WWE.
That's what
Right.
we hope, is that, competition will bring the best out of them. And I mean, I don't know how many times you hear people like, how Vince is when his back's to the wall, he's going to, and I used to be like, yeah, you're right. But now I'm like, is he still that guy? Like,
Yeah, exactly.
is it, because he's
Well,
being threatened
if
regardless.
you think of WWE before the NWO, it was in a similar situation to what it is now. It
Right.
was not great, and it took the WCW NWO thing to bring on the Attitude Era.
Oh
Without
yeah.
that, who knows what would happen if they don't do that? Who knows? So WWE is back against the wall. But even if they never change, I have AEW now, and right now, it's special. Right now, listen, the running around right now, we know they don't last forever. Like there are golden moments in wrestling, but as long as I keep listening to fans, even if it's not at the peak like it is now, it's still going to be a hell of a story. And
I
I don't think Tony Khan, he's somebody that's going to be learn to change when he has to change.
I think I really do think that wrestling, if you look at the history of wrestling, not just WWE history, but if you look at the territories and you see how Vince came in and swallowed that up, and yeah, he had a business mind to him, a business genius, but he also had youth on his side. A lot of those guys he was taking over were old bookers that were out of
True.
touch. Vince was giving the crowd at that time what they wanted. I think when when Vince launched WrestleMania, I believe he was 40 years old.
Wow.
39, 40 years old, okay? Tony Khan is 38 years old. Vince had 20 years from WrestleMania 1 through the Attitude Era up into the early 2000s. That's a hell of a run. He's sharp, he's cunning, he just knows. He has his finger on the pulse. It's nothing to shit on Vince. It's just how it goes. It's like an athlete, man. You can't be at the top forever. Eventually, a younger, faster guy comes along. And I
Yes.
really, truly think that pro wrestling is a young man's game when it comes to booking. I'm not saying 20-year-old guy, but I really think, you know, Tony Khan is in that sweet spot where we've got probably 20 to 25, 30 years of just him at the top of his game. And then he'll get to that point too.
Yes, you will.
You know what I mean? Like
Of course you will.
you won't, you're not sharp. It's not, no one is a Superman. Like the older you get, your brain slips. You're not as quick on your feet. You get out of touch with the current trends of the day. You get out of touch with what the youth of the world want. You may think you're in touch, and I think the way to combat that is to surround yourself with people and listen to younger people who have their finger on the pulse. Vince doesn't really do that. He surrounds himself with yes men. So
Yes.
it's like,
And everybody's afraid to speak up and tell him.
yeah, so you need, booking and really, it's not just about telling good stories, because when you brought up Darby Allin, how in the beginning it's like, oh, he's so small, Jungle Boy's so small. And I think the reason I quickly got over stuff like that is like wrestling to me. I love the wrestling itself, but wrestling has always been one thing for me, and that's storytelling.
Yeah.
I love stories. I love those stories. The matches are great, but the stories are what drive me. And Vince has lost that storytelling aspects. It's more than just the stories themselves. It's the, what kind of sense of humor are you tapping into? What's the music you're playing? What's all of these things connect with that 18 to 49, your prime time demo that buys the merch, that goes to the shows. And I feel like he's lost that touch. And it just, that hits to me thinking, I really do think like running a promotion is a young man's game. It's not a 75-year-old man's game. It's a young
Yeah.
man's game.
It's like you said, a 75-year-old, 80-year-old does not know what a 25, 30, the demo that they're trying to sell to, a 75 to 80-year-old guy doesn't get that. And it's time to
He
listen.
could help himself a lot if he brought in people to challenge him and if he listened to those people. But when you think you just know, you know what's best and no one else knows, then I feel like you're, like I said, you're unaware. And the worst thing you can be in a company or as a person is unaware. You have to be self-aware.
100%. And thanks to Tony Khan and AEW, we speak for many people. We love wrestling again. We are in love
Absolutely,
with
man.
wrestling again.
I've
Like, we're excited.
I've said this before on podcasts with you, I think, and with Snead and other people, but and this might be a bold statement because I think a lot of wrestling fans tend to build up nostalgia more than any other fandom.
That's true.
They look to, and I'm not, old wrestling stuff's great. We all love it.
Of course.
But I feel like they hold nostalgia so high that it they don't give present day stuff its just due because it's not like it used to be. You get a lot of that. But growing up through the golden era of WWF, growing up through the Attitude Era of WCW and WWE, I have never been more involved, infatuated, and in love with pro wrestling than right now, ever. And maybe that's a testament to me being old enough to understand the ins and outs of everything. As a kid, you're just watching it for the entertainment of it, but knowing the behind the scenes stuff, the free agent market, all of that stuff adds to a level of excitement that I've never felt before in pro wrestling. Like, so right now, All Elite Wrestling, NWA, Impact, all of the different promotions out there doing their thing, but specifically AEW has definitely rekindled my love of wrestling to a point that it's never been at before in my life.
Yeah, I agree. And I was a little older for the Attitude Era, and I was never like this, like I was then. Like you said, I sentiment exactly what you just said is exactly how I feel. And luckily for me, I'm now along for the ride and enjoying it with you and Snead and Mike Belcaster, and we get to come on and we get to talk about it.
And honestly, dude, I think that is another thing. I talk about maybe it's because we're older and we know what's going on, but maybe that's why I'm having more fun as a wrestling fan now. But the podcast is a big part of that. Being able to every week shoot the shit with like-minded diehard wrestling fans, and essentially we're nerding out, we're just geeking out, we're nerding out over stuff, we're grown men losing our minds over pro wrestling, but having the debates every week, having interviews with pro wrestlers and getting to know them, and doing the flagship show on Thursdays where we break down AEW Dynamite, like all of that stuff. Just you always hear like athletes talk about when you're a coach, it reinstills your love of the game because you're teaching it every day. Well, I think us talking about pro wrestling all the time just further ignites my fandom.
I agree 100%. A Turnbuckle Tavern for life. I love you guys.
Man.
This has been amazing. And dude, this was so much fun.
Yeah, this was a blast, dude.
This was a great conversation. Guys, if you're not following us already, the turnbuckletavern.com. You get all of our links. Make sure wherever you're listening to podcasts, you're subscribed. Please rate, review. That helps us so much. If you love us, help us get the word out there. On YouTube, follow us on YouTube. Make sure you hit the notification thing so you know when we go live. There's a lot going on there. We got recap shows. We've got news blurbs, popping up more and more. We got Fig Night every Thursday. We're growing and we're enjoying doing it with you. So help us spread the word. Thank you for joining us, guys. That's it for the sessions this week. We will be back next week. Love, peace, and wrestling.